Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're joined back again by Richard Hill, who is the DNA testing advisor, which is also his website, and he is also an adoptee and sole author of this independent guide to DNA testing. His book is Finding Family, and today we're going to be talking about, for those of you out there who are adopted children, how you can identify your biological families, how to learn about the DNA testing strategy for adoptees, and how adult adoptees should go about contacting their birth families. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Richard Hill. Richard, thank you for being back on the program today.
Well, thank you, Daniel, for having me again.
Now, think about, adoptees, that's got to be kind of rough. Here you are in a family that isn't yours, but they are your family at the same time, but there becomes that yearning to find out where they actually come from. Tell us about how they go or what drives them to search for their biological families.
Well, I think in most cases it's just all the unanswered questions. Adoptees want to know, who was their mother and who was their father, and do they have any siblings, and what ethnic ancestry do they have, and what medical conditions did they inherit. So there's a lot of things like that. Most cases, adoptees are not trying to replace the parents they grew up with. They're just trying to get some answers so they can have some kind of closure.
I think I completely agree with you when it comes to that. What would you say are the biggest challenges who face adoptees who want to identify their biological families?
Well, the biggest challenges are the records. In most states, adoptee birth records are still sealed. I mean, it's amazing that adult Americans who happen to be adopted just simply lack the same rights that everyone takes for granted. We're not allowed to see our original birth certificates. Now, there are a few states that have opened up access, but there's I would say at least 40 states where you're simply not allowed to see this information. And even if you can get the information, unfortunately there's a lot of cases where the information has been destroyed or lost, or it's just plain wrong, particularly about birth fathers.
Now, I'm curious what it does, why so many states decide to seal adoption records. What's going on there?
Well, I'm sure you remember that this started mostly in the 40s, although I think there were a few of them that did it before then. But if you remember, children of unwed mothers were pretty harshly labeled. I mean, they called us bastards. Not a very nice name. And it's not just name-calling. There was discrimination. I can remember in my case when I talked to my adoptive mother about this, she told me one reason they decided to clam up about it was there was a neighbor lady that lived on our block that wouldn't let her children play with me. And, because like I was contaminated or something.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's certainly no fun.
No, well, the society's gotten a whole lot more open about this kind of stuff now.
Yeah, I remember as I was growing up, my father didn't really want anything to do with the situation, and so it turned out that another man decided to step in, and then he's the one who's on my birth certificate. So, but you're still left with questions, about who is this guy, what was he all about, things like that. But then eventually, as you get some of the answers, you kind of feel settled down about the whole thing. But this was back in the 60s as well, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
Right.
As far as single unwed mothers go. I'm curious, this day and age with technology, especially when people are out there searching, do you find that it might be a lot easier now than it was when you started?
Oh, it's much easier now. I mean, for one thing, you have the Internet now, and we didn't have the Internet when I was starting to search. So you had to go around to various libraries if you were trying to track down records, like I was trying to find city directories of from the town where I was born and stuff, and to find various families and things that lived in the area. And nowadays, so much of the information is available online. And then, of course, the other big thing is DNA testing. The DNA testing has gotten so powerful, and now that the databases are so big, that's the real difference. I mean, even 5 years ago, the DNA the genetic genealogy databases were fairly small. And when an adoptee would try to take a test, they'd be lucky if they got maybe third cousin matches. And if you're trying to work from a third cousin match, it's an awful lot of work to do. I mean, a third cousin, that means you have a pair of great-great-grandparents in common. So you got to look at all that person's great-great-grandparents and then start tracing the lines down forward in time until you can find somebody in the right time and place that might have been your parents.
Now, in DNA testing laboratories this day and age, what would you suggest to be the best strategy for people?
Well, the best strategy is to use the right test and to get in all the major databases. There are 4 major genetic genealogy databases that I would recommend that every adoptee and pretty much any genealogist now would get into all of them, because you never know where your best matches are going to be. And those databases, there's Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, Family Finder, which is a test offered by Family Tree DNA, and MyHeritage. Those are the 4 that provide matching right now, where you will get a list of all the people that match you. And as I said, you want to be in all, because let's say you test in just one database, and the best you come up with is a third cousin. Well, if you tested in one of the other databases, there could be a first cousin sitting in that database that you wouldn't even know about. So, of course, the first cousin is a whole lot easier because you have a pair of grandparents in common instead of great-great-grandparents. So it's just a much easier road if you exhaust all the possibilities by getting into all 4 major databases.
Wow, it seems like it's easy, but at the same time there seems to be a lot of work involved with all this, isn't there?
Well, again, it's getting less work because as the databases get bigger, you get more matches and you tend to get closer matches. So more adoptees. In fact, I've got some statistics for you. I can read you that there's a survey done every year by a man named Blaine Bettinger, and his 2018 survey is still in the works, but his 2017 survey found that, and this is thousands of adoptees, that this is for adoptees who started searching in 2017. When they logged into their accounts, 48% of them saw a half first cousin or closer, and 82% saw a half second cousin or closer. And as a result of the DNA testing, 58% found a parent, sibling, or half-sibling. And those are just amazing numbers. Say 5 years ago, it wasn't anywhere near that good.
Well, that's pretty impressive, too, when you think about it. And I'm kind of curious, as people are out there in their search, if the birth families, are happy to be found by the children they gave up for adoption.
Well, you've got an entire spectrum of results. If you've ever watched any of the TV shows like Long Lost Family, for example, you'll see that there's many cases of where those parents that gave up a child for adoption due to circumstances that they found themselves in many years ago have never forgotten that child, want to know what happened to them, and have been searching themselves. And it's so you've got that case where at one extreme where you find somebody that's been looking for you, and then at the other extreme you find, particularly among women, you may find a woman who gave up a child for adoption 50, 60 years ago, and she is still haunted by that. She considers it an embarrassing event, and she's never told her family. Maybe she's married now, and has kids. She's never told her husband, never told her kids. So she lives in fear that there's going to be a knock on the door someday. So you got all extremes, and then most people are not at one extreme or the other. They're somewhere in the middle.
What was it like for you?
Well, in my case, nobody in my biological family It's differently. On my father's side, nobody knew I existed because my mother had hidden her pregnancy, left town, and never told my father or his family about the pregnancy. So they didn't, never had a clue. On the mother's side, she had her sister. Her sister knew that she had given up a child for adoption, but didn't know anything other than she knew where she went, what town she went to do it, and that she came back there without the baby. But she didn't know anything more about what happened other than she heard it was a boy. But she didn't know any of the details. And again, my mother really wasn't talking or sharing that information.
Now, what about people who are out there that are about ready to engage in this process? So what would you suggest as a good strategy or steps to take when they decide to go do this?
When they decide to do the testing, or
when they decide to go and connect with the families that they're trying to find.
When they've got a really good lead and decide to reach out and connect with the family. Yeah. One thing is you got to do it cautiously, and consider that person's privacy, because again, you don't know until you talk to them what kind of a situation they're in. They could be thrilled to hear from you, or they could be horrified to hear from you. So you got to do it very carefully. You've got to do it very discreetly, so that if by chance you do get into one of these cases where it's a deep, dark secret, that you're just talking to the birth mother, but you're respecting her privacy and just trying to get some answers.
Now, when it comes to contacting and all that, what should they expect? I mean, there must sometimes be surprises, as you were saying.
Oh yeah. Well, I always try to tell adoptees that are doing this that your number one goal is information. You want to get your questions answered. You want to know who your parents were, what were the circumstances that led them to, giving you up for adoption. Why did they make that decision? Do you have any siblings, half siblings, or in some cases even full siblings? That's the kind of key information. Medical information, ethnicity. The goal, I tell people, is to get your questions answered. And even if a woman doesn't want to have a relationship with you, more often than not, if you approach it quietly and calmly, you can at least get some answers. Now, there's some women will just hang up and not want to talk to you at all, but fortunately that's in the minority. Most, the world has changed. Even if the birth mother was, horrified by this choice and it was an embarrassment 50, 60 years ago, they realize that in today's society, having a child out of wedlock is no longer embarrassing. I mean, it happens all the time. I read one statistic that said of the newborns born in the U.S. this year, 40% will be born to unwed mothers. So it's not like that's an embarrassing thing anymore. The society has really changed.
Right. And it's so true too. I remember when I was just trying to reach out to some half brothers that I have, and I've only been able to connect with one of them. And the stepfather they had, he says, "Well, I had no idea you were out there." And I said, I totally understand. And says, "Well, you don't mind, this may take me a bit to be able to do this." And I said, "Look, I'm this old now. It's been this long. I can wait." But it actually happened to be a lot quicker when I got contacted. But as I was saying to him, I said, I'm not interested in crashing into your life and being, it's up to you. I'm just letting you know I'm out here, and it's, your choice from this point forward. So a lot of times, as exciting as it could be for people out there who are in search and trying to get these answers at the same time, there's a real cautious step I feel that you should take for doing this.
Yes, and you exhibited a very good attitude, where you're, like I say, you're not trying to mess up anybody's life, cause them any embarrassment for the people who might still be embarrassed about this, but you're just trying to get some answers. And would they please, have a 5-minute conversation with you and answer some questions? And if they want a relationship, you're open to meeting them and talking more. If they don't want a relationship, then you'll say, well, thank you, have a nice life, and I'll leave you alone.
Yeah, pretty much that simple, actually.
Yeah.
How was it for you? Was it that way, or did it seem welcoming, or what was it like?
Oh, it was very welcoming for me. I was very lucky, and it was on both sides. I identified my birth mother first, and she had already been killed, so she wasn't around. But I did find her sister. I did find some cousins, and they were all very welcoming. And then on my father's side, of course, they had no clue about me whatsoever. But once they heard from me, and one of the things I did when I first contacted some potential half siblings and cousins is I wrote a nice letter, kind of explaining what I was trying to do, the clues that I'd found that made me think that their family was related to me, and and sent along some pictures, some photos of myself at various ages. And the reaction that they all had was that, wow, yeah, you look like a member of our family, You look like, I think you're this man's father, or this man was your father, or maybe this man was your father. They're talking, because in my case there were 5 brothers. So for quite a while we had a challenge to identify which of 5 deceased brothers was my father. But they were all into it and willing to help in any way they could.
Well, at the same time, too, there's an exciting side to all this and people connecting and knowing who they are and kind of seeing the unique similarities that only you guys would know about each other as well.
Right. Right.
It was like it turned out my youngest of the 3 half-brothers had the same name as I do. That's kind of unusual. And
same first name?
Yeah, same first name, believe it or not, Daniel. And I thought that was kind of funny. And then on top of that, as I was listening to him talk, I realized, he's got a way of putting things together that kind of remind me of me as well. This was somebody I'd never talked to until that moment.
Well, there's no question that we're all a product of nature and nurture. And, the people that raised us, provided the nurture, and they had a big impact on how we grew up. But there's also the nature. There is that DNA, and you tend to have some things that just get inherited that just tend to run in families. And it's not just, medical conditions and things like that, the obvious things you go about, but I know some of the experiences I've seen is like people often have an interest in a music or a musical ability. I have none myself, and I don't know of anybody in my family that does, but I've seen cases where adoptees connected with their birth family and found out that they all had a talent for music, and that somehow that was genetically passed on.
Wow. Well, that actually also confirms I was reading a book called The Talent Code that talked about that very thing, especially when it came to Mozart. Here everybody just has this feeling, this guy just simply sat down and played, but the fact is he actually came from generations of people in the family who were musicians or had music in their family, so pretty fascinating stuff.
Right.
Now, when it comes to DNA tests, I know there was also another answer I was curious about, and that was my ethnicity. There are other reasons adoptees are using DNA tests besides just to find family, isn't there?
Oh, yeah. And questions about ethnicity are certainly one of them. I need to caution people, though, that the ethnicity tests, while all the major tests offer some kind of an ethnicity breakdown, this is still a new science, and there are a lot of major hurdles to overcome. And I know a lot of people are disappointed that their results are not what they expect. And if you understand how the DNA is inherited and what the challenges are of doing this, you can then kind of understand why your results may not come out what you want. And like somebody might want to say they're from Poland, for example, and they want to see Polish. Well, maybe all they're going to see is Eastern European, because the tests just aren't that precise. They can't tell the Poles from the Russians, from the Lithuanians and so on. There's just too similar genetically, and there's been too much migration back and forth, So far there isn't a lot of detail that people would like to see, And another thing is the populations just don't stay the same. I mean, people have been moving around for thousands of years, and just because you have a grandparent that came from, say, France, that doesn't mean that you've got all this French DNA, because the French and the Germans and the Swiss and whatever, they've all mingled and mixed for hundreds of years, and there's been wars and migrations, and so getting a pure French DNA signature, it really just doesn't happen yet. I don't know if it ever will.
I know when I was in search, we had a company that allowed us to do some DNA testing, and I was kind of curious as for my Native American bloodline, as that's what my father and his grandfather were. And it turned out it didn't show anything like that at all. In fact, it showed that I was mostly British and a little bit of Middle Eastern. And so I was actually talking with my uncle here last September, and he was saying, well, that can't be right, for one.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing is he says, but our bloodline does go back to English and Scottish as well, which it certainly showed, British.
Yeah.
And so I thought, okay, well, there you go. But he was claiming that one of the possibilities that perhaps those tests are cutting that out is the idea behind people who are searching for their Native American bloodlines in pursuit of benefits and money. So, I don't know whether that's true or not. But.
No, that's not true. The problem is that when Native Americans, came across from Asia, they basically migrated from Asia over what was a land bridge between what's now Russia and what's now Alaska, tens of thousands of years ago. And at that point, they had very distinct Native American DNA. Well, about 500 years ago, the explorers from Europe began showing up, and you had the English in the east, the French in the north and in the south, the Spanish in the south and the west. You had all kinds of Europeans that came over and started, first of all, they started just, plundering the area, and then they started settling the area. And, over the last 500 years ago, there's just been a lot of mixing. So even people who are culturally Native American are very unlikely to have 100% Native American DNA anymore, because somewhere in their ancestry there was a European, and that just kind of diluted out that original Native American DNA.
Well, that certainly makes a lot of sense.
I did read a statistic, I think it was from 23andMe, one of the testing companies. I think they said that, I'm could be a little off because I'm doing this number from memory, but I think they said that only 2.7% of their users showed up with any Native American DNA. So, I mean, it's just very rare to find. And again, what makes somebody Native American is not their DNA. It's their culture, and it's the fact that they have been accepted by a particular tribe. The tribe has to claim you as a member of their tribe. That's how you are judged as being Native American or not. And they don't use your DNA, and they don't really care about your DNA.
Good way to put it.
Yeah.
I'm curious, there's a term that you have, NPE. What does that mean?
Well, originally that was a technical term, which was non-paternal event. And that confused a lot of people. And someone somewhere along the line came up with a better definition. And so now most people are using not the parent expected. In other words, it means that, and it happens, somebody takes a DNA test and they find out that, I'm related to a bunch of my relatives on my mother's side, but I don't show up as related to anybody on my father's side. Because it turns out there was some kind of an NPE from their father, that the man who raised them was not their biological father. That happens for a variety of reasons. Of course, there's, adoption is one, because a lot of people were never told that they were adopted. I wasn't. I had stumbled into it when I was 18. So there's a lot of adoptees who, some of them 60 years old or more, just suddenly find out they were adopted, or they take a DNA test and don't match either of their parents in that case, and they come out and the secret comes out. In other cases, you've got children of sperm donors. There's a lot of parents that had conception issues, and they turn to laboratories who use sperm donors for inseminating the mother, and as a result, they have a child, and they raise that child as their own. And a lot of times they don't tell the child that they turned to a sperm donor. It's one of these big secrets that so many people don't want to admit to. It's like some kind of a failing or something. So quite a few people are discovering that they're children of sperm donors. In fact, there's just an article I saw just the other day. One woman was raised as an only child, didn't think she had any siblings, and she takes a DNA test, and she comes finding she's got half siblings and another half sibling, and she's getting half siblings showing up all over. And so far, she's identified 30 half siblings.
Wow.
Because her father was a prolific sperm donor. And as a result, she is biologically related through that man to at least 30 people so far, and there may be more showing up later,
That's funny. I can't help but think of the movie Twins, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito, where it was a scientific experiment to produce the ultimate genetic, baby, I guess it was. And Danny DeVito's character is the twin, but he was the genetic leftovers, I guess. Kind of crazy out there when you think about it.
I remember that movie. Yeah, that was funny.
So tell us, Richard, for our listeners out there, how they can find out more about this and what we've been talking about today, and how they can get the book Finding Family.
Well, I have a website, first of all. Now, I don't sell the book directly, but my website has all kinds of information on DNA testing for adoptees and genealogists and everything else, and that is DNAtestingadvisor.com. And you can actually spell that different ways. You can use it with or without hyphens, and you can spell advisor with an ER or an OR. So any of them will work and get to me. So that's my website. For people who are on Facebook, I have a Facebook page by the same name. And then, let's see, as far as the book goes, the book exists in 3 different forms now. It exists in print, it exists in ebook form, and it exists in audiobook form. And Amazon is a good place because Amazon has all 3 forms. You can get any of the forms you want at Amazon. But the print book may be carried in your local bookstore too, or certainly they can order it. All they have to do is look up the title, and the full title is Finding Family, My Search for Roots and the Secrets in My DNA. So if you prefer to support your local bookstore, please do. You can just ask them to order it if they don't carry it.
Well, very good. Again, for our listeners out there, the book is Finding Family. Our guest joining us here, Richard Hill. Thank you so much for being on the Beyond 50 radio program today.
Well, thank you much, Daniel. I enjoyed it.
You bet. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for joining us. Another way you can journey into getting more information is by finding us at our website at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We do encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter to keep up to date with what's going on in the world of Beyond 50 as well as our upcoming shows. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.